Peter Combe, welcome to noise11.com. I've lost count of the number of albums that you've had. What are you up to? Do you actually know the exact figure?
I counted the other day, actually. I think I've done 16 albums of original children's songs, 2.5 albums of original adult songs, and a whole lot of compilations of fairy tale stories and fairy tale songs. So it probably adds up to something like 25 albums altogether. It's 16 of original kid songs.
Wow, because the very first album you did was an adult album, wasn't it? Vagabond.
That's right. That's number one. Yeah. Well, actually, the very first album I did was an album for the BBC in London, which was just traditional children's songs. But Vagabond was my first album in Australia of original songs, all adult songs. Yeah.
So you were going to be Australia's Bob Dylan, but instead you turned into Australian Bob Dylan for 5-year-olds.
That's right. Yes. Australia's Bob Dylan. I was probably more like Australia's Paul Simon, I think. But when I went to London, that was what I was trying to be. But of course, there's only one Paul Simon. There's only one Bob Dylan, and I kind of it came a point where I thought I was sending children's songs back to the ABC then, and they seemed to like them. But I had a song I wrote in 1974, which should have be a little bit of a flag in a way. Song called "Running on the Spot" or "I Can Run as Fast as You." It's just a 2-chord little song. I can run as fast as you. I can run as fast as you. I can run as fast as you. Running on the spot, and it's been a staple on Play School for 50 years. They started playing it in 1974, and it's been on constantly ever since. So that was nice.
Wow!
And I think that was a sort of but I didn't really start writing children's songs seriously till more like about 1980 when I wrote Spaghetti Bolognese. So that was the beginnings of really taking it very seriously and doing it sort of full time.
The new album, A Frog in My Cheese Sandwich, what amazes me about this album is that you can come up with new ideas still. This is the incredible part of what you do.
And that's the great challenge of when you've written as many songs as I have, is to try not to be cliched. You want to always come up with something which sounds fresh and new. And so it gets harder and harder the older you get. The more you put out, more albums you put out, the harder it tends to get. So you've got to work harder at it. But I'm kind of really quite pleased with the new album. I think I've done quite a few things a bit different on it. I've used a string quartet on 2 songs, and that was just a lovely experience. And I always love working with kids in the studio because it gives the album a special sort of freshness. And I've always been amazed that other children's artists around the world don't seem to have kids on their albums, and I find that strange because if you sing to children, it's the most natural thing to sing with them as well. So and I love doing it. So. And luckily, my daughter found some very good kids for me this one. So yeah, it's been great.
I was going to say your daughter, talking of putting kids on the album, you actually have your own kid on the record.
I do, yes. I've used my own children on all my albums over the years. Not because it was a kind of a cute thing to do, just so they could all do it and they enjoy doing it. And so I thought, well, why not use my own children if they love doing it and they can do it. But the other thing that's worth saying, Paul, is that the last album last year, I released an album called Planet Earth, Third from the Sun, and I used all 7 grandchildren on it. They either sang on it, spoke on it, or both, or did the front cover artwork. So that was quite interesting, using all my 7 grandchildren last year.
That's a great thing, isn't it? I mean, once upon a time, 30 years ago, you were king of the kids. Now you're king of the grandkids.
That's right. That's a good new title. I haven't heard that before. I might use that.
But it is funny. Like my son, my daughter, who were little 5-year-olds, 3-year-olds when Newspaper Mama and things like that were coming out, were huge fans. And then when you started doing the pub gigs, because that audience had suddenly become, in their 20s and their early 30s, you started doing pub gigs where that generation who were 5 years old when they were listening to you originally could come along to a pub, but you were still doing those same old songs like the Newspaper Mama and whatever, and they were loving it.
They were some of the most enjoyable gigs I've ever done. I did over 100 of them over a period of 4 or 5 years. It was, as you just said, I mean, they came along and there was a sense of that they were surprised at themselves that they knew the song so well. So
Mm.
when I sang newspaper, it doesn't matter what I sang, especially if they're off albums like Toffee Apple, Spaghetti Bolognese, and Newspaper Mama, they just knew all the words. And of course, the reason they knew all the words because when you're 5 years old and you're hearing a cassette or a CD, you don't just listen to it 3 or 4 times. You hear it 100 times in the car, when you go to bed, after school, before school. So the songs are sort of drilled into their consciousness. So when they came to the pub and I got up and sang their song, there was the look of surprise. I mean, you can almost see them thinking, "I still know this. I know all the words." And it was quite lovely. They were quite lovely gigs. That was like a sort of almost be like a tradition, a religious experience. Those gigs, except without the religion.
And I guess around that era in the mid to late 90s, it was the perfect timing too for listening to music in cars because we had the advent of the car CD player by that
Yeah.
stage. But for anybody who had their Datsun 180B from 15 years earlier, there was still a cassette player. So and kids had to listen to a Peter Coombe record when they got in the car. I mean, it's the only way to have a comfortable journey as a parent in the late 90s was to either have it on cassette or on CD.
Yeah, yeah, had loads of emails about that very thing. Listening to my albums in the car, but then they're lovely. I really appreciate it.
Yeah, so I guess now they can stream them in the car, and mission
Oh
accomplished.
yeah,
They've got the entire catalogue to travel with now.
I have. Yeah, well, yeah, with Spotify, of course, you can pick anything. The only thing about Spotify, which I find a little sort of disappointing, is when I make an album, I'm very careful the way I order songs. I never order, say, two songs that are similar, one after the other. So if I have a song in 3/4 time, well, the next one will probably be in 4/4 time or 6/8 time. If it's in the key of G major, the next one will be in F major, that kind of stuff. If it's a rock song, the next song will be more of a folky thing. So I love every track to be a total surprise to the listener.
We've almost got a bit of a concept album theme going on here with, the I dream I could fly and I
Yes.
dreamed I could fly, followed by
Yeah.
dreaming at the end of that.
Well, there's a sort of interesting story there. I suppose I had what a lot of people I've had a dreaming dream, and my dream is still very clear in my head. It's 20 years ago now, but I was actually dreaming. I was flying right adjacent to the house where I grew up, and that's what that I dreamed I could fly is about. And then I thought, well, it'd be nice to do a sort of a contemporary one where a fictitious young child is actually dreaming. So then I had the alternative song was "I Dream I Can Fly," and I discovered this gorgeous boy soprano called Patrick Golden. He's got the most delicious voice, and I was really quite touched when I heard him sing. You occasionally discover these gorgeous boy sopranos, and Patrick was one of them. I've had two other ones in the past, one of them including my son. So it was lovely and then of course you put a string quartet with it. It really just adds it to it enormously.
Mm. Let's talk numbers because there is a very scientific educational song on this
There
record,
is.
10,000 Stars.
Yeah.
We're talking about, the fact that for every grain of sand on a beach, there are 10,000 stars per grain of sand. That's how many stars there are in the
Yeah.
universe,
Yeah.
which is, quite factual as well.
Yeah. I know.
People do want to fact check you on that. They might be very, very surprised. Russell Morris, a very good friend of mine, we sit around and we talk about this shit for hours. And here you are educating children with basically Russell and I having a pub conversation.
Well, I still find that statistic quite almost incomprehensible that there could be a lot more stars in the universe than there are grains of sand on planet Earth. It's just almost impossible to imagine. You walk along any beach anywhere, you see how tiny grains of sand are. But that's what I only heard that repeated on television by a scientist about 4 days ago, just before I flew over here. So that it's just a fascinating statistic. I thought we'd love the kids to know that. Then they can go off and they can read about it, they can explore it. So there are certain things like that with children, like things like the dinosaurs and the planets are like that too. They're fascinating subjects that you can do within a song, make it very entertaining, but at the same time subtly educational. Think about education, you need to make it very subtle, not sort of hit you over the head with it, but just subtle stuff.
Oh, yeah, yeah. And particularly, with statistics like that, they're quite mind blowing. Like you've got your Superman T-shirt on at the moment. This is what I've been absorbing the last month. That's what I've been getting
Oh,
into.
oh right. Yeah, yeah.
And when you think about a show like that, when we grew up as kids, and when that show Lost in Space came out, like we were taught that there were 9 planets in the universe, and then we
Yes, that's
found
right.
out that there's this infinite number of planets and stars, and Lost in Space was right all along, weren't they?
Yeah, yeah, oh yeah. It's sort of beyond comprehension, those kind of numbers. I mean, in the song it says 23 septillion, which is like 23 with like sorry 70 with 23 noughts. That's roughly how many there are.
Yeah,
But it's just all fascinating.
we've got a lot to learn then, haven't we?
We do, yes.
With a lot of children's stuff, and I know Disney does this. They give it a 7-year lifestyle. Uh, they give it a 7 years of life before they bring it back and they repeat it. Is it like that with you, that after every 7 years you can just basically repeat what went before?
Oh, you could. Oh, yes, yes. There's no doubt that children in that sense are very their tastes are very timeless, really. Even at an age of of iPads and screens and things, when you get a bunch of children in a concert hall, they really are just the same as they were 40 years ago. And my best known song, which is Mr. Clickety Cane or Wash Your Face in Orange Juice, to a 5-year-old child, it could have been written yesterday. It makes no difference to them whatsoever.
Hmm.
But this, I should say, the current album is really not really a preschool album. It's more, I don't know how much you've heard of it, but it's more of a kind of a mid-primary age sort of album. Because I just think those kids always tend to miss out, and they tend to gravitate towards people like, guess, Ed Sheeran and Taylor Swift fairly quickly. And I'd like to think that maybe you could if you could give them songs of their age range, they wouldn't gravitate quite so soon. Not that there's anything wrong with Taylor Swift or Ed Sheeran, but also a bit of a pity when 5-year-olds find there's not much for them, which has been written for them. So that was part of my reason for writing this sort of album. I want to write it for slightly older kids because they don't get very much.
A song like Houdini, the Escapologist, then I guess you're talking about, that
Yeah,
sort of a song,
yeah,
because, like
yeah, yeah.
a 3 to 5-year-old's not going to relate to a Houdini, but a 7 to 10-year-old is probably
Yeah,
starting to learn about
yeah.
that sort of stuff.
Well, it's a fascinating story too. And the fact that he actually jumped off the Queen's Bridge in Melbourne, all chained up, and apparently stayed underwater. Well, there's varying reports on how long he stayed under, but some people said it was 4 minutes. And then when he came up all unchained, he was grinning.
Mhm.
And he sort of apparently he said, "Look, I wasn't unsafe at all. Really? Not unsafe being underwater for 4 minutes?
And particularly
What
in the
what what
Yarra
am I going to
too.
do?"
I wouldn't want to
Sorry.
be in the Yarra these days for that long. Yeah, God knows what is under the Yarra these days.
Yeah, right. But what a fascinating character he was. That was probably the hardest song to write because you're trying to write about someone's life and you can't write a really long song. But I wanted to somehow encapsulate the main bits of Houdini, the most interesting bits. And I thought the leaping into the Yarra was just extraordinary. That
It's
took that took up a whole verse.
Isn't it fascinating that someone like a Houdini once toured Australia, Abbott
Yes.
and Costello once toured Australia, Charlie
Yeah. Yeah.
Chaplin once toured Australia, and it's like mind blowing when you think about what transport was way back then.
Yeah. That's right. Yes. I suppose they came out obviously by ship, which would take them probably 5, 6, 7 weeks to get here.
Hmm.
Then 5, 6, 7 weeks to get back again to wherever they were going.
Yeah, yes, how things have changed. Man in a Superman
Yes.
t-shirt.
Yes. That's right. Yeah. Well,
Yeah.
I'm glad you picked up on that thing about 10,000 stars. That's something that's I love doing things like that expand children's knowledge, but in a sort of a very musical, sort of artistic sort of way.
Peter, great to talk to you, and a frog in my cheese sandwich. There you go. There's an album for Christmas.
Thanks, Paul. Lovely to talk to you too.